My name is Bethany Cole. I'm 36 years old, and until recently, I was an assistant compliance officer for a regional bank in New Hampshire. I lived alone, paid my taxes, volunteered on weekends, and clipped coupons like it was a competitive sport. You could say I was ordinary, borderline invisible. And I was okay with that. Until the day everything changed. Not with a dramatic phone call or a knock on the door, but with a piece of paper, printed from a vending machine under flickering fluorescent lights at a gas station off Route 4. A lottery ticket. Numbers I picked on a whim. 6 digits that, together, spelled out something unbelievable. $2.1 billion. Yes. Billion. With a B, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell anyone. I just sat there in my 10-year-old Corolla with the check engine light on and stared at those numbers. I didn't call my mom or my dad. I didn't call my siblings. I didn't call my best friend because I already knew what would happen if I did. I grew up in a family where love had a price tag, where help came with fine print, where saying no made you selfish, but saying yes meant you were forever in someone's debt. So I made a choice. A radical, quiet, deeply calculated choice. I told no one, not a soul. I hired a lawyer, created a blind trust, changed my number, took time off work under a fake health leave. And then I started an experiment. I wanted to know something that had haunted me for years, but I had never dared to ask out loud. If I had nothing left to give, would anyone offer me a hand? So I staged a collapse. I told my family that I lost my job, that I needed $7,500 for medical expenses and rent. I reached out to the same people who had taken from me over the years without blinking, and one by one they gave me answers. Some politely declined, some offered sympathy without substance, some ignored me altogether, but one person offered me a hand, not the wealthiest one, not the one who owed me the most, but the one who had the least. I remember the moment so clearly. Her voice shaky over the phone, asking if I was all right. Then her showing up at my door, holding a paper envelope. Inside, $5,000, nearly all the savings she had. She didn't ask when I'd pay her back. She didn't ask why no one else was helping me. She just said, "Family shows up." That's all. That envelope is still in my drawer, unspent, untouched. Because it meant more than money ever could. And now I'm telling this story because people always ask, if you won billions, why didn't you tell anyone? The answer is simple. Because the truth costs more than any lottery ticket ever could. And if you really want to know who your people are, pretend you have nothing. That's what I did. That's what changed everything. That's why this story isn't about how I became a billionaire. It's about how I became free. So if you're still watching, ask yourself this. If you were suddenly worth more than $2 billion, would your family love you more or just want more from you? Because the day I won the lottery wasn't the day my life changed. It was the day I stopped being afraid to test the truth. And what I found out? Only one person offered me a hand. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, more like a plastic one. Cracked, stained from years of use, but still expected to function flawlessly. I learned early that money wasn't just currency in my family. It was power, control, a scorecard, a weapon even. When I was 16, I received a letter that changed everything, or so I thought. It was from a local scholarship foundation, congratulating me for earning a partial tuition grant based on academic merit and financial hardship. I'd filled out the paperwork myself, wrote the essays, collected the recommendation letters, sealed the envelope, dropped it in the mailbox while walking home from my weekend shift at the diner. It was my win, mine, but that's not how my parents saw it. "Let's just hold it in the joint account for now," my mother Valerie had said sweetly. "Safer that way, don't you think?" Back then, I was still naive enough to believe she meant it, still too eager to believe we were a team, that we were, in her words, a family who supports each other. 2 months later, when my first semester bill came due, the account was empty. I confronted her in the kitchen while she peeled carrots for Sunday pot roast. She didn't yell, didn't deny it. She simply wiped her hands on a dish towel, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Bethany, you don't understand how tight things have been lately. We needed it. Your brother needed braces. Your father's car needed a new transmission." As if those reasons rewrote the terms of that scholarship. As if my efforts were communal property to be redistributed at will. And then came the kicker, her signature move. "You should be proud we trusted you enough to help us. That's what family does." I stood there, 15 years younger, but already beginning to understand a brutal truth. In our house, what's mine was theirs. But what's theirs stayed theirs. My father, Dean, wasn't any better. If my mother was all velvet traps and emotional sleight of hand, he was lecture halls and moral high ground. He believed in financial discipline the way some men believe in war strategy, cold, calculated, and always justified. When I got my first job at 17, data entry at a temp agency, he insisted I get a debit card tied to a shared family account for emergencies. 3 months later, I noticed strange charges. Gas stations I hadn't visited. Online orders I hadn't placed. I asked him about it. He sighed, leaned back in his recliner, and said, "Well, if you're going to be part of this family, you need to contribute like one. We're not running a charity here, Bethany." I was 17. I made $9.50 an hour. He made 3 times that in a single afternoon teaching a financial ethics seminar at the community college. But that was Dean for you, always talking about self-reliance while leaning hard on everyone else's wallet. Still, I tried. I tried to be understanding, to be the good daughter. I told myself things would get better once I moved out, once I had real independence, once I earned enough to never need anything from anyone. But even then, the damage had already been done. They had taught me to fear needing help, to equate dependence with weakness, to see generosity as a transaction that would eventually come back to bite. I began hoarding small wins like they were coins in a jar. Every freelance job, every side hustle, every coupon clipped, every utility bill paid on time. I tracked it all, like evidence, proof that I wasn't like them. And then there was the piano. I bought it when I was 19, secondhand upright, scratched mahogany, keys a little chipped on the higher octaves, but it worked. And it was mine. I'd saved for a year, bussed tables, babysat, tutored. No one had helped me, not a cent. That piano was my rebellion. It sat in the corner of my tiny dorm room like a quiet monument to self-made stability. Until one winter break, I came home to find it gone. Dad had pawned it. "Beth, you weren't even using it anymore," he'd said, casual as ever. "It was just collecting dust. Besides, we had property tax due, and your mother's back went out again. Do you want us homeless?" He smiled like he'd done me a favor, like it was a teachable moment, and just like that, my sanctuary was sold, without permission, without warning, without regret. That was the day I stopped calling the house I grew up in home. It became a place I visited, a place I tolerated, a place I escaped from every chance I got. So years later, when I sat there staring at that lottery ticket worth $2.1 billion, I didn't think about buying a mansion, or a yacht, or a designer purse. I thought about that piano, and what it felt like to have something stolen because someone else thought they deserved it more. That memory didn't make me bitter. It made me careful. Because I knew, better than most, that when it came to family, the fastest way to lose yourself was to have something they wanted. It was a Friday night, the kind that drips slowly off the clock, 1 second at a time, until all the hours blurred together into static. I had just gotten off a 10-hour shift. My blouse smelled faintly of printer toner and stale office coffee. My feet ached from standing too long at the compliance meeting we weren't supposed to call a compliance meeting, because according to upper management, that sounded too serious. I stopped at the gas station like I always did. Same worn-out linoleum floors, same flickering light above the refrigerated drinks, Same tired cashier with pink nail polish chipped around the edges. I grabbed a bottle of water and paused in front of the lottery machine. Just like every Friday. It was ritual at this point. Automatic. $10. Quick pick. But that night, I hesitated. Something inside me whispered, pick your own numbers. It was stupid, really. Superstition with no logic. But I did it anyway. I chose 6 numbers. Carefully. One at a time. 7, my dad's birthday. 21, my mother's. 3, my brother's. 11, my best friend Charlotte's. 16, the day I left home. 29, the day I moved into my first apartment alone. Each number had a weight. Each one carried a name, a story, a scar. I paid, stuffed the ticket in my purse, and went home. I didn't even think about it again until 8:57 p.m. When the drawing came on the television, I wasn't watching. I had Thai takeout in front of me, pad see ew, and a spring roll. My cat, Murphy, had already curled into a loaf beside me, purring softly. The announcer's voice filtered into the background. The winning numbers for tonight's Megamax drawing are... I reached for my purse lazily, mostly out of habit. First number, 7. My hand froze mid-air. Second number, 21. My heartbeat kicked up, just slightly. Third number, 3, 4th, 11, 5th, 16. My fingers trembled as I pulled the ticket from my purse. I stared at it, blinking once, twice. 6th and final number, 29. Silence. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that hums in your ears, the kind that makes you feel like time has stopped and the world has forgotten to breathe. I looked from the television screen to the crumpled slip of paper in my hand, then back again, then back again. I read the numbers 5 times. I cross-checked them on the lottery app. I refreshed the page, and again, and again. It didn't change. I had won. Not a few thousand. Not a few million. $2.1 billion. The screen confirmed it. A single winning ticket sold at Eastwood Gas and Grocery. Ticket manually selected. It was me. It was really me. The first thing I felt was disbelief, then dizziness, then absolutely nothing. I didn't scream, didn't jump up and down, didn't call anyone. I just sat there, frozen. My eyes drifted to the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked, soft, steady. Tick, tick, tick. My ears rang. My breath came shallow and fast, like I was underwater, too deep to rise, too stunned to swim. I reached for my water, but my fingers couldn't grip the cap. I set it down. Slowly. Murphy stirred beside me, confused by the energy shift, but I couldn't touch him. I couldn't move. The weight of it hit me all at once. This money could erase every bill, every credit card, every ounce of financial fear. I could disappear, reinvent, rebuild, do anything, go anywhere. But the very first thought I had wasn't about houses, or vacations, or debt relief. It was about my family, about how quickly they'd change if they knew, how my father would demand I invest wisely while requesting a loan he had no intention of repaying, how my mother would weep with joy, then ask for a new kitchen, how my brother would send screenshots of his overdraft and say, "Hey sis, help me out one last time," how even Charlotte, my one true constant, might shift just a little, might look at me not as her best friend, but as a safety net. I sat in that quiet living room, surrounded by my modest furniture and lukewarm noodles, and realized that winning had made me invisible in a whole new way, because if I told anyone, I'd never again know whether they were talking to me or to the money. The truth felt ugly, but it also felt clean. It was my decision now. And in that moment, I made it. No tears, no drama, just this simple, silent promise to myself. I'm not telling anyone. I didn't sleep that night. After checking the winning numbers more times than I care to admit, I closed all the blinds, locked the doors twice, and sat in silence. Not fear. Focus. The next morning, I brewed a cup of black coffee and began making calls. By 9 a.m., I had an appointment scheduled with Edmund Keene, a highly recommended financial attorney whose bio read like someone who'd already dealt with panicked lottery winners, messy trust fund battles, and multi-generational empires unraveling over brunch. His office was in a downtown high-rise with glass panels and minimalist furniture. Everything looked expensive, but not flashy, cold in that deliberate, competent way. I wore jeans and a gray sweater. My palms were sweating as I entered the elevator. The receptionist greeted me with the kind of smile you reserve for VIPs who aren't dressed like one. 5 minutes later, I was ushered into Mr. Keen's office. Walnut bookshelves, a leather chair that probably cost more than my car, and framed degrees from schools I couldn't afford to tour when I was younger. He stood to shake my hand. Early 50s, salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a gaze that could probably detect a lie before it left your lips. "Ms. Cole," he said, calm and deliberate, "what brings you in today?" I pulled the lottery ticket from my bag and slid it across his desk. He didn't blink, just glanced down, nodded once, and placed it gently into a leather folio. Then he looked at me, no smile, no awe, just the professionalism of someone who had seen things fall apart. "I assume you're here because you don't want this to ruin your life." It wasn't a question. "I want to disappear," I replied. "Financially, legally, personally, if necessary." "Smart," he said, leaning back in his chair. "And timely. You have a few very powerful tools at your disposal. Let's talk about the first, a blind trust." He explained it plainly. A legal entity that would claim the prize on my behalf, keeping my identity anonymous. The money would be held in a separate name, and disbursements would be routed through authorized accounts. My name wouldn't be listed in any public lottery announcement. No photos, no press. "You'll need a new address," he continued, "a new P.O. box, and a secondary financial institution, preferably out of state, for higher level separation. I'd also advise creating an LLC for general transactions." I nodded and took notes like a student prepping for the final exam of my life. Then came the second part, the part that felt oddly satisfying. "I'd also recommend establishing a living trust and updating your will," Mr. Keen said. "You'll want full control over who gets what, and more importantly, who doesn't." That's when I leaned in. "Can we make it ironclad? As in, legally untouchable if anyone tries to come after me?" He smiled, just a flicker. That's my specialty. We spent the next hour outlining layers of protection. The trust would be structured with multiple tiers, a holding entity, an executor's clause, and a discretionary payout schedule. No one, not even family, could access or influence it without explicit permission from me. And I made sure there was one clause written in with precision. The beneficiary reserves the right to decline, defer, or deny financial requests from any party based on discretion, history, or conflict of interest. Any contestation will be met with legal arbitration as outlined in Section 4, C Simple. Quiet, brutal. Before I left, I turned back to Mr. Keen. "One more thing," I said. "Yes?" "If I ever need to respond to someone coming after me for money, trying to manipulate their way into this fortune, I want something in place. Something already written, already legal, already signed." He nodded. "You want a preemptive strike file?" "A what?" "It's a concept I developed for clients in situations like yours. Think of it as a legal fire extinguisher. We prep responses now, restraining orders, asset freezing protocols, non-disclosure agreements. All dormant, but if anyone crosses the line, we activate it." "Perfect," I said. I left his office with 3 things: a secure trust plan, a will that had my name on every clause, and a quiet confidence I'd never felt before, because for the first time in my life, I was holding the pen. No more signing over accounts I didn't understand. No more letting other people rewrite my future. The world didn't need to know I'd won, but I knew exactly how to protect myself now that I had, and that was worth more than the money itself. The trust was set. The legal barricades were in place. The money was mine. Untouchable, invisible, locked behind layers of signatures and clauses and codes only I could access. But I still didn't feel safe. Not from lawsuits, not from hackers, from something worse, expectations. You see, once money enters the picture, real money, you stop being a person. You become a solution, a jackpot, a rescue boat, or worse, a target that bleeds gold. I didn't want to guess anymore. I didn't want to wonder who loved me for me and who loved the idea of what I could give them. So I built something of my own, a little social experiment, a test of loyalty. And like all good tests, it needed a script. It started with a single sentence, scribbled onto the first page of a fresh notebook. Hi, I hate to ask, but I'm in a really tough spot right now. That was the opening line. Then came the story. Believable, desperate enough to matter, but not dramatic enough to raise suspicion. My fake emergency went like this. I'd been laid off suddenly. My department at the bank had been dissolved due to internal fraud I had nothing to do with. Because of that, my final paycheck was delayed, and I had outstanding medical bills from a biopsy I hadn't told anyone about. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to make them worry and hopefully lean in. Total I needed $7,500, just enough to be painful, not impossible. I spent hours writing the dialogue, practicing in the mirror, testing tone, pauses, inflection. Can I borrow just enough to cover rent and the hospital fees? I promise I'll pay you back within 3 months. I know it's a lot, if I had anyone else to ask. I memorized every sentence, even the silences between them. I needed this to sound real, to feel real, because only then would their answers be real too. After scripting the scene, I started the list. My mother, Valerie, my father, Dean, my older brother, Jackson, my younger sister, Alyssa, my Aunt Vivian, Dad's sister, who married rich and never let anyone forget it, my cousin Caleb, her son, who once cried to me over gambling debts and borrowed $2,000 he never repaid, and finally, my great-aunt June, a retired librarian I once helped through a nasty probate case when no one else in the family returned her calls. 7 people, 7 different histories, 7 chances to reveal who they really were. And then there was Charlotte, not on the list, but sitting across from me at my kitchen table while I outlined the entire plan. She sipped chamomile tea with a disapproving look that was somehow still gentle. "Beth," she said slowly, "this isn't a game. These are people you know, people you're close to." "Am I?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She didn't answer right away. "Testing them like this, lying to them, it's going to hurt you more than it hurts them." I held her gaze. "Maybe I need that hurt." Charlotte set her cup down with a soft clink. "What are you trying to prove?" "That I'm not crazy for feeling used," I said. "That I'm not paranoid, that I'm not the only one who remembers the things I've done for them. The loans, the favors, the silence." Silence? All the times they asked without ever thinking to give. Charlotte sighed, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. "And what happens if they say no?" "Then I know." "And if they say yes?" "Then I know." She studied me for a long beat. "And what if they ask why you didn't come to them sooner?" "Then I'll lie again, just like they did, every time they said, 'I'll pay you back.'" It wasn't easy saying those things. Charlotte wasn't just my best friend. She was my anchor, my emotional mirror. But even mirrors crack when held too tightly. "Beth," she said quietly, "this could blow up in your face." I smiled. "That's okay. I've already survived worse." There was a pause, a long one. Then she nodded. "All right, but if this goes sideways, I'm not saying I told you so. I'll just pour you wine and hand you a bat." "Deal." We clinked mugs instead of glasses. She stayed the night, just in case I changed my mind. But I didn't. By morning, I had a list, a rehearsed story, and a plan. One by one, I would contact them. Same script, same tone, same request. Just enough to measure not their wealth, but their willingness. Because in the end, it wasn't about the money. It was about the math of human connection and whether anyone would still show up when there was nothing left to take. I called my mother on a Thursday afternoon. Not too early. She hated being disturbed during her Pilates live streams. Not too late. She also hated anything that felt remotely like a surprise. I waited for the perfect window, 3:17 p.m., the quiet lull between her hair appointment and her third coffee. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Hello, sweetheart," she chirped, voice bright and airy like lemon meringue. "Hi, Mom," I said, steadying my breath. "Do you have a moment?" "For you?" "Always." That was a lie. But I didn't flinch. I started the script, softened by nervous pauses, made more believable by the intentional cracks in my voice. Something unexpected happened. I lost my job, downsizing, sudden, and now I have a stack of bills and no income, and I paused for a breath. I wouldn't ask unless I absolutely had to, but I'm short about $7,500 for rent and medical. There was silence on the line. Then came the sigh. "Oh, Bethany," she began, stretching my name like taffy. "I wish you'd come to me sooner. If only you'd listened when I told you not to go into finance." "I didn't call for career advice, Mom," I said gently. She recovered quickly. "Of course not. I just meant, sweetie, you've always tried to do everything alone. It's brave, but maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's time to come home for a while." Reset. Like my life was a blinking modem. "I'm not asking to move in, just for help with this gap until I find another role. I already have interviews lined up." Another pause. Then her tone shifted, like velvet layered over steel. "Beth, I'd love to help." "Really? But you know your father and I are remodeling the upstairs bathroom. We already put down the deposit." There it was. The subtext was louder than her actual words. "Your crisis is inconvenient. My renovation is priority." "I understand," I replied, swallowing. "I just thought, maybe your father can help," she interrupted, chipper again. "He's been better with money since the credit card situation last year." "Sort of." I nearly laughed. Dad had used my credit, maxed it, defaulted. "Sort of" was generous. Still, I stayed in character. "Do you think he would? I mean, you're his daughter too." She laughed like it was a joke. Then, "Anyway, if you need emotional support, I'm always here. But financially, we're tight, with the bathroom and all." She paused. And then came the dagger, wrapped in silk. "Besides, maybe this is one of those learning moments. You're strong. You've always bounced back. And honestly, I can't help but wonder if this would have happened had you stayed at that firm I introduced you to. Remember? The one you dismissed?" I let her talk. Let her plant blame like it was comfort. I thanked her for taking the call, hung up, and opened my notebook. Entry, Valerie, mother. Tone, sympathetic, distant. Offered emotional support only. Excuse bathroom renovation. Redirected responsibility to Dad. Delivered guilt-layered subtext. You chose wrong. This is your consequence. No offer to follow up, check in, or contribute partially. Emotional manipulation. 6 out of 10. Financial contribution. 0 out of 10. I underlined 2 words. Default position. No. My mother had spent a lifetime cloaking control in kindness. She didn't slam doors, she closed them gently and blamed the hinges. She didn't yell, she sighed like your need had inconvenienced her aura. I closed the notebook and stared at the blank ceiling above me. $2.1 billion. And not 1 cent of it would ever go to her. Not because of this call, because this call simply confirmed what I'd known since I was 13, sitting in the kitchen while she borrowed from my scholarship fund to pay off her boutique line of essential oils. She had always known how to say no, especially to me, but I was learning too, and I'd just begun the test. He chose the Starbucks on Maple and 3rd, not the quiet one near my apartment or the one with the small tables where we used to play checkers when I was a kid. No, he picked the one downtown. Loud, glassy, performative. The kind of place where people pretend they're working on screenplays but are really eavesdropping on every conversation. I arrived 10 minutes early. He was already there. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream, like always. Sitting at a corner table with a newspaper he wouldn't finish and a Bluetooth earpiece he wouldn't use. I approached slowly, rehearsing my lines like I had before, but something about his posture. Shoulders, drawn tight like piano wire, eyes scanning like he was already disappointed, made my words taste dry in my mouth. "Hey, Dad." He looked up, folded the paper once, then again. "Bethany," he nodded. "You're looking tired." I smiled. "Yeah, it's been a week." He gestured to the chair opposite. "So, what's this all about? You sounded, shaky on the phone." I eased into the seat. My palms were damp, my stomach tight. "I didn't want to go into it over the phone," I said. "But I've hit a rough patch. I lost my job and—" I let the sentence hang, waited for him to ask a question. He didn't. "And I'm trying to stay afloat until I get back on my feet. Rent? A medical bill? It's temporary, but right now I'm short about $7,500. He whistled, low and judgmental. "That's not pocket change," he muttered, then added, "You sure you weren't living above your means?" I swallowed. "Number. I've been careful. This just happened fast." He leaned back, arms crossed. "You know what they say. Most Americans are one emergency away from bankruptcy. It's the system. But also, it's choices." There it was. The pivot. "You're smart," he said. "You've got degrees, connections. You shouldn't be sitting here asking your old man for money." I didn't respond. He sipped his coffee, then set it down harder than necessary. "You know, Bethany, when I was your age, I was working 2 jobs. No handouts, no bailouts. Your grandfather, God rest his soul, he made it clear. You dig your own ditch." I let him talk. "And I've told you before, you don't build strength by leaning. You build it by standing up on your own." I nodded slowly. "So, is that a no?" He didn't even blink. "It's a lesson?" I bit the inside of my cheek. "Can I ask you something?" I said, tone even. He waved his hand. "Sure. Do you remember maxing out my student credit card senior year, the one with my name on it? You said it was for a business opportunity." He blinked, then scoffed. "That was different." "How?" "I paid most of it back." "You paid the interest. I paid the debt." He didn't apologize. Of course not. Dean Cole didn't do regret. He did revision. "You were young. You needed a push. Life doesn't come with cushions." I blinked back, something burning in my eyes. "And you think this conversation counts as a cushion?" He leaned forward, voice low but firm. "Bethany, you want my help, but you came here with a latte and a cardigan that costs more than my entire wardrobe. You're not dying. You're not destitute. You're asking for ease. I'm offering truth." I looked down at my cup. It was tea, not coffee, and it cost $3.85. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook. Dean, father. Location, Starbucks downtown. Offered, moral lecture, 0 financial support. Excuse, self-reliance, personal. Values, emotional manipulation. Framed refusal as wisdom, redirected past debts as life lessons. Emotional tone, condescending, proud, financial contribution, 0 out of 10. He squinted at the notebook. "What's that?" "Just notes," I said. "For what?" "For me." He exhaled like I'd failed a test he hadn't told me I was taking. I stood up. He didn't. "Thanks for the coffee," I said. "I didn't buy it," he replied. "I know." As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me hard, but not as hard as the silence between us had. The tears didn't come right away. They never do with him. Because when someone's disappointed you slowly, quietly, methodically, for years, you don't cry from pain. You cry from grief. Grief for the person you once believed him to be. Grief for the idea that once you looked at this man and thought he could protect you from anything. But now he couldn't even protect you from $7,500 worth of struggle. I sat on the curb for a moment. Then I wrote one last thing in the notebook. He quoted self-reliance in a $3,000 suit bought with someone else's credit. And I finally let the tear fall, not because he said no, but because for a long time I believed his no meant I wasn't worth a yes. I waited 2 days before calling Olivia, not because I was hopeful, but because I was tired. Of all the people I reached out to, she was the one I expected the least from, and yet somehow her silence still stung the most. She picked up after the fourth ring, her voice airy and distracted. "Beth? Oh, hey, sorry, I thought it was the contractor calling." I could hear the clinking of dishes, a soft echo of music in the background, some acoustic playlist, curated and clean. Olivia never liked noise, only ambiance. "Hey, Leave," I said quietly, trying not to sound rehearsed. "Do you have a second?" A pause. Kinda in the middle of something, but sure, what's up? "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious," I said, softening my tone. "I'm going through a bit of a financial emergency. I lost my job, and I need help covering some expenses, medical bills, mainly." Another pause. This one longer. I could almost hear her deciding how empathetic she wanted to sound. "How much are we talking?" $7,500. A small, sharp laugh, barely audible. Then, "Beth, wow. That's a lot." "I know." More clinking. I'm already pretty maxed right now. We're renovating the lake house, and you know how those things snowball. The tile alone is triple what we budgeted. Plus, Kyle wants to put in solar panels. "You own 2 properties," I said before I could stop myself. A beat. She lowered her voice. "Okay, but that doesn't mean we have liquid cash sitting around. You're building a wine cellar. That's for resale value. It's smart investing." "I'm not asking for a loan," I said. "I'm asking for help." There was a strange creaking in her voice, a shift in tone I recognized. Not guilt, not concern, shame, but not the kind that moves someone to act, the kind that makes them defensive. "You know," she said slowly, "I've always admired how independent you are. You're the one who got scholarships, moved out early, made your own way. Maybe this is just a bump. Maybe it's meant to remind you how strong you are." I closed my eyes. A bump. Like my entire life hadn't been a mountain range. "Right," I whispered. "I wish I could do more," she added in that familiar sing-song tone, the one she used on realtors, waiters, and people she didn't want to offend. "I get it," I said. "I really do." After we hung up, I didn't cry. I wrote in my notebook. "Olivia, sister. Call duration, 3 minutes, immediate reaction. Evasive, justification, renovations, budgeting, passive advice, emotional tone, cosmetic concern, contribution, 0 out of 10. Last line, you're strong. You'll figure it out." No offering, no follow-up. Just the assumption that I was built to survive what others wouldn't bother touching. Next, I drove across town to visit Aunt Vivian. She lived in a gated community with a long, winding driveway and a mailbox shaped like a swan. Her house smelled like lavender and old money. Everything in it was white. Couches, walls, even the carpet. Like she was allergic to chaos. She welcomed me with a cautious smile. "Bethany, what a surprise. You look thinner." "I haven't been eating much." "Well, at least you're not bloated," she chirped. We sat in the sunroom, a place where no sun actually entered. She poured tea from a porcelain set she only brought out for guests she wanted to impress. I suppose I qualified that day. "I won't take long," I said. "I just need help. I'm in a tight spot. Medical and rent expenses, just temporary." Vivian nodded, eyes polite but not warm. How much are you short? $7,500. She let out a soft hum, like someone evaluating a number that wasn't offensive but wasn't comfortable either. Sweetheart, I wish you'd come to me before. You know your mother and I, well, we've always had different ideas about handling things. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I stayed quiet. I mean, I've helped so many people in this family. Your cousin Greg needed money for rehab, twice. And when Melissa's husband left her, I was the one who... She stopped, took a sip of her tea, then looked at me with what I can only describe as selective warmth. You know I care about you, right? I nodded slowly. I know. She placed her cup down gently. But I have to be careful. Legally. You're not technically, you're not my direct responsibility. I blinked. What? I mean, you're not my child, not in the legal sense. She said it like it was a formality, but it sliced deeper than she realized. I'm my mother's niece, your sister's daughter. Yes, of course, she said quickly, but the rules are different. Tax-wise, you'd be surprised how strict these things are. I'm not asking for a trust fund, I said, voice tightening. I'm asking for compassion. She shifted uncomfortably. Bethany, don't make this about morality. Money and morals rarely mix. She stood up before I could speak again. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise. As I left, I caught her looking at the piano in the hallway, the same one I helped her move into the house 10 years ago. She never once mentioned it, but I did. Do you remember when you were short for movers and I helped you haul that thing in myself? She blinked, then looked away. I was younger then, she muttered. So was I. But apparently, now I was old enough to be forgotten. There's something particularly exhausting about hope. Not the big, dramatic kind, but the small, persistent flickers. The kind that tells you, maybe this one will be different. I texted Ethan around 7 p.m. on a Thursday. He responded instantly. Of course, Beth. You don't even have to ask. I'll wire it tonight. He even added a heart emoji. It was stupid, but I let my shoulders relax. Ethan was my younger cousin. Restless, overly confident, but not unkind. When his mom kicked him out sophomore year, I let him crash on my couch for 6 months. Paid for his first job interview suit. Never asked for anything in return. I thought, maybe he remembered. I stayed up until midnight, refreshing my banking app like a fool. Nothing. By 2 a.m., his read receipts were off. By morning, his Instagram stories were on. He was at a rooftop bar, clinking glasses with 2 girls and captioning it, "Can't lose what's already gone." I stared at the screen. Not in anger, not even sadness, but recognition. This was the same Ethan who used to borrow my gas card, forget to return it, and act surprised when the balance was maxed. The same Ethan who once cried in my kitchen after getting dumped and then stole my roommate's weed on the way out. Still, I'd let myself believe in him. That said more about me than him. I texted once more. Hey, just checking in. Let me know if something changed. Nothing. Not even a blue check. Not even the decency to lie again. I opened my notebook. Ethan, cousin. Initial response, enthusiastic. Promise, immediate wire. Action, ghosted. Social media, active within 12 hours. Emotional tone, performative. Contribution, 0 out of 10. Final contact, unresolved silence. The next day, I reached out to Jake, my older brother. If you had asked me 5 years ago who I loved most in the family, it would have been him. No hesitation. He taught me to ride a bike, to sneak snacks into movie theaters. He defended me once when Dad called me dead weight. But time had carved a distance between us. Not sharp, just quiet. Still, I thought maybe that loyalty lingered under the surface. I texted first. Jake, I know you're busy. I hate even asking. I wouldn't if it weren't urgent. He replied 4 hours later. What's going on? I lost my job, I typed. I've got rent, medical bills stacking. I need $7,500 to stay afloat this month. Scene. Then 3 blinking dots, then nothing. I waited. 8 hours. 10. At 11:14 p.m., he sent, "Rough timing, B. I'm swamped with work stuff. Let's talk later this week." I didn't reply. At 8 a.m. the next morning, he posted a boomerang from a blackjack table in Vegas. Work stuff. I stared at the screen, not blinking. My coffee went cold in my hand. For a brief second, I considered smashing my phone. Instead, I went to the drawer where I kept old photos and letters. I pulled out one image, Jake in a hospital bed, leg in a cast, face pale. It was from 5 years ago, after his motorcycle accident. I'd loaned him $12,000 that year, cleared my savings, took a side job tutoring just to cover my own bills. He'd cried when I wired the money, said he'd never forget. Apparently, he did. I took a picture of the photo and texted it to him. Just that. No caption, no guilt, just a reminder. He saw it. Blue check, no reply. I added to my notes. Jake, brother. Initial response delayed. Deferral tactic. Swamped with work. Contradiction? Vegas post within 12 hours. Past support? $12,000 loan in 2019. Emotional tone? Avoidance? Contribution? 0 out of 10. Final contact image sent, no response. I read over the 2 pages in my notebook. Ethan, Jake. So different on the outside. But when tested, same playbook, ghost, deflect, disregard, and worst of all, forget. They forgot what it meant to be helped, to be carried when you couldn't walk. And now, when the roles reversed, they sprinted the other way. The silence was no longer surprising, but it was still loud. I sat on the edge of my bed, notebook in hand, phone screen glowing with notifications I didn't care to read. My voice shook, not from sadness, but from clarity. They were never planning to stay when the light went out. This wasn't rejection. It was revelation. I had walked these paths before, heart open, hands full, and every time I'd been left empty. This time, I didn't need to scream. I just wrote it down and crossed their names off the list. I had stopped expecting the doorbell to mean anything. After a week of unanswered texts, polite refusals, and deflected conversations, I stopped looking out the window when someone passed by. I stopped hoping every ding on my phone might be a change of heart. But that Tuesday morning, just as the kettle started to whistle, the bell rang, not once, twice. Then silence. I opened the door slowly, still in sweatpants, hair a mess, and heart just numb. Standing there, holding a worn canvas tote bag and a small, white bakery box, was my great-aunt Eleanor. I blinked. I hadn't even called her. She smiled before I could say a word. "You look like you haven't eaten something decent in days." She stepped in without waiting for an invite. Just like always. Before I could piece together a sentence, she was already in my kitchen, placing the box on the counter, pulling out 2 chipped mugs from the cabinet like she lived here. "I made banana bread. The good kind," she said, her voice warm but not overbearing. "With the walnuts you like?" Still stunned, I asked, "How did you know I needed help?" She didn't sit. She turned toward me, both hands around a small, plain white envelope. "I didn't. I just had a feeling." She handed it to me. I opened it carefully, half expecting a letter or some old photograph. Instead, 5 crisp $1,000 bills. I looked up, throat dry. I didn't ask." "I know," she cut in gently. "That's why I came." Her words weren't heavy. They didn't carry guilt or curiosity. Just kindness. Honest and simple. "I don't have a lot," she said, "but I have enough to share." Something about that sentence cracked something deep inside me. It wasn't just the money, it wasn't the bread or the fact that she remembered how I hated raisins. It was that she came, without being called, without condition, without fanfare. My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. Not from the amount, Lord knows I didn't need it, but from the sheer gravity of the gesture. After all the conversations that ended in excuses, here was someone who just showed up. Quiet, decent, true. I couldn't find words. I stood there, trying to say something. Anything. I don't even know what to say, I finally whispered. Eleanor just poured tea. You don't have to say anything, Bethany. We sat at the table in silence. Not awkward, not forced, just still. She asked about nothing, not the money, not the problem, not even about the rest of the family. She just talked about how the tomatoes in her garden were late this year, how her neighbor's cat had kittens, how quiet the street had gotten since the bakery shut down. And somehow, it was perfect. The tears came without drama. They just slipped down my cheeks while I chewed banana bread. Eleanor didn't mention it. She simply reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Gentle. Steady. You're not alone, she said softly. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. Later, as she packed up to leave, I offered to walk her out. She refused. I know my way, she winked. At the door, she turned and added, by the way, I always knew you'd make it through anything. I watched her walk down the path, her steps small but certain. Once she disappeared around the corner, I stood there for a long time. The envelope was still in my hand. It wasn't the money I'd remember. It was the hand that offered it. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. And in a storm full of silence, that choice was louder than anything else. I didn't sleep that night. The envelope sat untouched on the kitchen table, its contents still folded neatly, as if the kindness inside might evaporate if I disturbed it. I kept staring at it, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to understand what it had meant. To her. To me. By morning, I knew I had to tell her, not out of guilt, not obligation, but because if I didn't tell her, then what she gave me would be wasted on a lie. So I baked a loaf of cornbread. Hers was better, always would be, and walked down the street with the envelope in my coat pocket. Eleanor opened the door with a knowing smile. Beth, she said, stepping aside to let me in, I was wondering when you'd come back. I didn't sit this time. I stood there in her kitchen, the same place where she used to make me peppermint tea as a child, when my parents forgot to pick me up from piano lessons. I need to tell you something, I said, steady but quiet. She turned off the burner and wiped her hands on a dish towel. I figured you might. I placed the envelope on her counter. I didn't lose my job. I didn't need help. She didn't speak, just tilted her head slightly. I won the lottery, I continued, voice shaking just enough to betray how hard this was. Billions, like actual billions. I waited for the gasp, the shock, the scolding. Nothing came. I didn't tell anyone, I said. I needed to know who still saw me when I wasn't useful, when I wasn't beneficial. The silence stretched like warm dough between us. I lied to you, I whispered, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. I tested you. Eleanor walked over to the counter, picked up the envelope, and tucked it back into my hand. Keep it, she said. I blinked. But why? Because the money didn't matter to me, Beth. Giving it did. She finally sat, motioned for me to do the same, and when I did, she reached for a teacup, poured one for both of us. Do you know, she said gently, why I wasn't surprised when you said you lied? I shook my head. Because I saw it in your eyes the moment you opened that envelope. Not shame, not desperation, just sorrow. She stirred honey into her tea with small, careful circles. And I've seen that look before. On myself. I frowned, confused. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. When I was your age, I married a man named Patrick. You've probably never heard of him. Your Uncle Donnie was my second husband. I nodded. I had heard whispers. Family lore, never details. Well, she continued, Patrick was charming, a dreamer, said he could make us rich, said all the right things. And I believed him. I gave him everything, savings, inheritance, my name on every paper. She took a deep breath. Then one day, it was all gone. The money, the car, the house we almost bought, all gambled away in some tech startup that didn't even exist. I sat still, watching her voice steady itself. I went to my sisters, my parents, friends I had loaned money to. No one helped, not one. Her voice didn't crack. It had been too long for cracks. And that's when I learned something. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, timing does. She looked me straight in the eye. Kindness isn't proven when it's convenient, it's proven when it's costly. A quiet settled over the kitchen, thick with understanding. You didn't test me, Beth, she added softly. You confirmed something I already knew. I exhaled, shaky and overwhelmed. But didn't it hurt? That I lied? Eleanor smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. Only for a second. And then I remembered, I'd rather be chosen for who I am than pitied for who I'm not. A pause. And I'm proud of you, not for the money, but for having the strength to look truth in the eye, even if it's ugly. I reached across the table, took her hand in mine. You're the only one who showed up. You're the only one who asked, she replied gently. It wasn't a dig. It was, a mirror. Later, as we folded laundry and chatted about nothing, she asked me one question. Did you get the answer you were looking for? I paused, folding a dishcloth in half. Yes, I said. And more. 2 days later, I was back in Mr. Keen's office. The windows were still spotless, the orchids still fake, the room still carried that scent of polished control. Leather, ink, silence. He looked up from his laptop and smiled, polite but firm. Miss Cole. I need to activate the clause, I said, pulling out the sealed folder we had prepared months ago. His brow lifted just slightly. The dignity protection protocol? Yes. He gestured for me to sit and leaned forward, hands folded. I had a feeling this day might come. I nodded, tapping the file. I want everything in motion, an official statement, a pre-written legal shield, and I want to include something else. Mr. Keen opened the folder, flipping through our earlier documents. We have the language prepared: declining interviews, anonymous charitable funneling, emergency trust shielding. What's the new addition? I inhaled. I want to revoke any implied emotional debt, formally. He blinked. Meaning? I want it to be legally stated that any family member attempting to guilt, shame, or threaten me into financial compliance will be treated as an external claimant. I want their past abuse, emotional and financial, documented, publicly, if necessary. He studied me a moment longer. You understand this isn't just defense anymore, he said. This is offense. I know. He leaned back, considering. Well, there's something you should see before we proceed. He pulled open a drawer and slid out a thick envelope. I wasn't going to show you this unless you asked, but I think it's relevant now. Inside were several pages, copies of public estate filings, updated 3 months prior. I recognized the names immediately, Dean and Valerie Cole, my parents. What is this? He pointed to the 3rd page. They updated their will. My heart slowed. When? 3 months ago, quietly. They filed a revision in Colorado, then had it notarized in Arizona. And? They removed you entirely. The room spun, not with pain, but with precision. They removed me? I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. No call. No conversation. Just deleted? Correct. They listed both your siblings, a distant cousin, and even a nonprofit foundation, but not you. I wasn't sure what emotion came first. Rage? Relief? Irony? Mr. Keen cleared his throat. There's more. Based on the documentation you provided earlier, records of credit taken out in your name before the age of 25, assets redirected without consent, and the piano pawned for personal debt, There may be grounds for a retroactive financial abuse claim. I blinked. A lawsuit? He nodded. If you wish. It wouldn't be about the money. It would be about precedent, about documentation, about dignity. I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because it finally made sense. All those years, all those moments when I thought I was being too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult. Turns out I had just been too quiet. What would happen, I asked, if I pursued it? Realistically, they'd panic, probably try to reconcile, reframe everything as a misunderstanding. And if I didn't? Then you'll have your money, your peace, and no closure. I tapped the folder, then looked him in the eye. I want both. He smiled, just a flicker. Very well. He began typing, drafting motions and filings, legal boundaries forged from memories I wish I didn't have. But I sat there, calm, not vengeful, just clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about record. I needed it written, not for the courts, not even for them, but for myself, to prove that I hadn't imagined it all, that the theft wasn't just financial, it was psychological, repeated, systematic, dismissed. Mr. Keene slid over the final document for me to sign. Last chance, he said gently. I picked up the pen, felt its weight. Then I signed. Bethany A. Cole, black ink on white paper, reclaiming space where my name had once been erased. I've always believed that rage doesn't need to scream to be dangerous. Sometimes it's most lethal when it's quiet, when it moves methodically. That's how I began my next step. While the world around me remained blissfully unaware, I started gathering, not weapons, not allies, but facts, receipts, emails, screenshots, dates, old bank statements showing the sudden $2,000 loan to my father that I never saw again. Venmo logs of emergency transfers to Olivia labeled as groceries and medical, even though I later saw her post new bags on Instagram. And then the biggest one, an email from years ago. Subject line, sign ASAP, urgent. It was from my father. Inside was a scanned document, a financial power of attorney giving him access to my account in case of emergency. I was 22 at the time, a college senior, exhausted, trusting, still naive enough to believe family came with safeguards. He had pressured me to sign it after my grandmother passed, said there were tax things I wouldn't understand. I found that document. I printed it out, highlighted his signature and mine, and the date. I placed it in a folder marked historical pattern. Then I opened another. Inside, I compiled the story most people wouldn't believe unless they saw it in black and white. The $10,000 withdrawal my father took from my account after I just started my first job. Money meant for my move to San Diego. I remember confronting him about it. You should be thanking me, he'd said. It was for your stepmother's dental surgery, family investment. We're in this together. I remember the sting, not just of the money, but of being made to feel selfish for even asking. That sentence stayed with me for years. Family investment. It haunted me like a broken record. But this time, I wasn't interested in replaying old music. I emailed Mr. Keene that night. Subject, documentation, phase 2. I didn't want a courtroom spectacle. I didn't want drama. What I wanted was insurance, a paper trail, a shield, because people forget. They rewrite. They gaslight. But documents don't lie. And someday, when this all comes out, and I know it will, there will be a moment when someone, maybe even my father, will say, I don't remember it that way. And I'll be able to say, that's fine. The truth remembers you. That was the real reason I collected everything, not to attack, but to remember. To protect the version of me that once trusted too quickly, loved too blindly, forgave too easily, the version of me that stayed silent, thinking silence was maturity. But silence without boundaries is not grace, it's erasure, and I was done being erased. Mr. Keene replied the next morning, received. Organizing for records. Let me know if you'd like to escalate. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my apartment, holding the final piece of evidence. A handwritten letter from my mom, dated 2 years ago, asking if I could lend her money to help with a spa and bathroom remodel, promising she'd pay it back as soon as Dad's bonus clears. There was a heart drawn next to her name. It felt so sweet at the time. Now it felt like a sticker on a trap door. I folded it gently, slipped it into the envelope, and labeled it intent and manipulation. Then I closed both folders, sealed them, and placed them in my safe. I didn't need to hold on to anger. I just needed to store the truth somewhere safe, somewhere I could retrieve it if ever my sanity or my story was questioned. I've learned that righteous anger isn't chaos. It's clarity. It doesn't shout. It writes. It remembers. It prepares. That's what I was doing. I wasn't planning revenge. I was ensuring no one could rewrite the history I had survived. And that, to me, was power. Not to punish, but to preserve. Not to destroy, but to define. The courthouse wasn't grand. It was a small, nondescript building tucked between a dentist's office and an abandoned bookstore. If you drove by too quickly, you'd miss it entirely. And that was perfect. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't need a stage. Mr. Keene called it a quiet resolution. Legally binding, discreet. The kind of proceeding where names were redacted, motions sealed, and all parties agreed not to disclose details publicly. I watched everything unfold from a screen in a private office 2 blocks away. I wasn't listed on any documents. My name never appeared in any filing, not even as a witness. I didn't want retribution through attention. I wanted peace through precision. The plaintiff was a concerned party representing financial interests of a minor turned adult. The defendant, my parents, the allegations, financial misconduct, unauthorized withdrawals, coercive contracts signed under familial pressure, emotional damages tied to dependency and exploitation. The evidence, impeccable. It was all there, compiled with surgical care, digital records, banking logs, signed powers of attorney, messages in my father's own words that all but confirmed how he saw me, not as a daughter, but as a fallback fund. My mother had responded through her lawyer claiming maternal intent and misunderstood financial arrangements. But intent didn't outweigh proof, especially not when paired with pattern. It lasted 3 hours. I sat still for every second. At one point, I watched the live feed as my father shook his head, muttering to his attorney. My mother kept checking her phone. I knew that gesture well. Distraction as denial. Their legal team tried to position them as victims of miscommunication. But the judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes like stone, saw through it all. Her ruling was calm, almost mechanical. The defendants were ordered to repay a calculated sum reflective of financial damages, emotional toll, and long-term impact. There were no handcuffs, no cameras, no headlines, but there was justice, and it was loud in its silence. They never found out who funded the case, who had assembled the legal team, who made sure every loophole was covered. They didn't know because I didn't need them to know. That's the part no one tells you about revenge. When it's done right, it doesn't need applause. I didn't want them to beg, or apologize, or even acknowledge me. I wanted boundaries, legally enforced ones, walls they couldn't climb, doors they couldn't open, accounts they couldn't touch. When the session ended, Mr. Keene messaged me. All finalized. They've signed the settlement. Funds will be held in escrow until full repayment. Confidentiality intact. I sat back in my chair. Not triumphant. Just still. Because the real victory wasn't the money. It wasn't even the legal win. It was knowing I could be violated, dismissed, manipulated, and still rise without becoming them. That I could fight clean. That I didn't need to scream to be heard. Later that week, my cousin Ethan texted our group chat. Anyone know why Aunt Val and Uncle Dean are so pissed? Some legal mess, apparently. No one replied. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear. It's funny how quickly people quiet down when the usual power dynamics shift. The ones who used to guilt trip me for setting boundaries were now whispering behind closed doors, trying to guess who'd pulled the strings. They wouldn't find out, because I didn't want them to. There's something sacred about a secret victory, a justice that doesn't need spectacle. I didn't want revenge that left blood on the floor. I wanted restoration that left me whole, and I got it. Every night, I locked the file away, the documents, the transcripts, the verdict, not to hold a grudge, but to remind myself that I am no longer someone who needs to explain her worth to people who never saw it. I used to wonder if justice was real, if it could exist for people like me, quiet, accommodating, too loyal for our own good. Now I know it can. It just doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes justice wears no robe, has no gavel, and leaves no bruises. Sometimes it's delivered in silence, with receipts. 1 year passed. Quietly, without announcement or spectacle, I began building something from the ashes. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was restoration. I used a portion of my winnings to establish an organization called Safe Hands, a non-profit that helps women who've endured financial abuse from their own families. Women like me who were told they were overreacting, ungrateful, dramatic. Women who had to lend their dignity in exchange for help. We didn't use buzzwords, we didn't do shiny galas, just silent, strategic interventions, legal aid, emergency funds, trauma therapy, housing, and above all, privacy, safety, sovereignty. I didn't want them to feel rescued. I wanted them to feel powerful again. Charlotte came on board as director of communications. She was the only one from my old life who stayed close. She never asked for money, just purpose. One morning, over coffee, she said, "You turned your pain into a blueprint. That's rare, Beth." I smiled. It's rarer to have a friend who stands by when the world thinks you're crazy. We didn't talk much about what happened with my family, but the ripple never fully stopped. I heard through the grapevine that my parents had to sell their second home to pay legal fees, that Jake blamed toxic women for everything, that Olivia's vacation rentals weren't doing so well. Ethan blocked me online. I didn't respond. I didn't send notes or messages. I didn't even feel satisfied. Just still. But there was one life I wanted to touch deliberately. Aunt Eleanor. After the trial, I invited her to lunch. She brought her famous pecan pie and wore a dress I remembered from my childhood, a soft yellow with little birds on the hem. "You always loved this one," she said. "Said it made me look like sunshine." I nodded. "You still do." Over dessert, I handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed, a cottage I'd purchased in a small town outside Asheville. White trim, a backyard just big enough for a vegetable garden, and 2 rocking chairs. She gasped, covering her mouth. "Bethany? No." "Eleanor? Yes." She looked at me with a mix of joy and sorrow. "I didn't help you to earn anything." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why you did." We didn't hug. We sat. We let the moment settle around us like soft light. A few weeks later, she moved in. I visited her every other Sunday. We talked about books and weather and childhood recipes. Not once did she bring up the money. Not once did she make me feel like I owed her anything. But she gave me something I never had. A sense of home. In the back of her cottage, she planted tomatoes, bell peppers, and a row of lavender. "For the bees," she said. I built a small piano room next to her garden with the same model I once bought in college, the one Dad had pawned. I played for her sometimes, simple tunes, nothing showy. And sometimes, when the sun set just right and the lavender swayed in the wind, I imagined a life that could have been, had I been loved the way she loved me. But I didn't dwell on it, because I was finally free. Free to give without being exploited. Free to rest without being indebted. Free to exist without constantly proving my worth. I learned something strange about wealth. The real kind is not in dollars. It's in choice, dignity, silence when you no longer need to scream. That's the justice I chose. One evening, Charlotte asked if I ever regretted not confronting the whole family publicly, posting screenshots, releasing statements, blowing up their reputations. I shook my head. They would have twisted it, called me unstable, said I made it up for attention. And now? They don't get my pain, I said. But they also don't get my peace. It happened on a Thursday, late afternoon. The sky had that golden softness that only autumn knew how to paint. I was walking through an old part of town, running errands I'd forgotten to enjoy, picking up apples from a farmer's market, browsing a used bookstore, lingering in time instead of racing against it. And then I saw it. The music shop. The one with the faded awning and warped wooden sign. It hadn't changed in decades. Maybe a new window pane here or there, but the soul of it was untouched. I hesitated in front of the glass. My reflection stared back, calm but alert, as if some quiet truth stood behind the door waiting to be met. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Dust, polished wood, old string oil. Familiar in the way childhood memories ambush you. Rows of pianos lined the walls, and then, like gravity, it pulled me. There it was. My old piano. The same one I'd bought with years of after-school jobs. The same one I practiced on until midnight, chasing music like it might save me. The same one my father had pawned, saying, you can't afford hobbies right now. It looked smaller now, not because it had shrunk, but because I'd grown. The store owner approached. Lovely piece, isn't it? I smiled. She used to be mine. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Well, she's looking for a good home again. And she came home with me. I placed her in my new living room, where the evening sun kissed the keys, soft black and ivory stripes bathed in amber light. For the first time in a long while, I sat down and played. My fingers stumbled at first, rusty and uncertain. But then they remembered. Music never judges you for disappearing. Note by note, I stitched myself back together. There are things we lose that never return. Moments, innocence, certain kinds of love, but there are values that can be rebuilt. Respect, autonomy, grace. I didn't need an apology from my parents. I didn't need validation from the siblings who forgot how to be family. I had this moment, this piano, this peace, and somehow that was enough. A week before Christmas, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's cursive, all loops and careful pride. Inside was a card. Family gathering, December 24th. All welcome. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers traced the ink, but my heart didn't move. There was no anger, no bitterness, just clarity. I slipped the card into the drawer of my desk between a thank you note from Eleanor and a photo of Charlotte and me at the Safe Hands launch. No need to respond. Some doors, once closed, aren't meant to be reopened, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. That evening, I visited Eleanor. She had decorated her porch with white string lights and little pine wreaths. We sat on her wooden chairs, wrapped in blankets, mugs of hot cider warming our hands. Still playing? She asked. Every night. I nodded. It's the one voice that never lies to me. I brought out my old sheet music, Claire de Lune. She smiled. I haven't heard that since your school recital. I smiled back. Let's change that. We played together, clumsy and offbeat, laughing when we missed notes, sighing when the melody found its way. The stars blinked above us, the lavender swayed beside us, and for a brief moment the world didn't need to be explained. Just lived. I spent years trying to understand what makes someone family. I thought it was blood, tradition, obligation, but it's none of those. Family is not who shares your name. Family is who stays when you have nothing left but faith. It's who shows up. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. Quietly, fully, with hands extended, not to take, but to offer. So, before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today, wherever you are. I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.